in the neutral country of Switzerland, is the small city of Lausanne, where Pierre de Coubertin, the founder of the modern Olympic Games, spent the last years of his life. Today, the Olympic movement faces the biggest crisis in its 86 years. It was here at the Château de Vidi, the headquarters of the International Olympic Committee, that the full impact of that crisis was to be felt. The story of the crisis began in 1973 when the International Olympic Committee received the application for Moscow to stage the Summer Games of 1980, together with the special sovereign letter guaranteeing that the Games would be held according to the IOC's rules and regulations. In 1974, with IOC President Lord Michael Callanan in the chair, 78 IOC members representing 62 countries voted in traditional secret ballot to decide between the only two candidates, Moscow and Los Angeles. Moscow won. Los Angeles applied again for the fourth time running in 1977 and was finally chosen to stage the 1984 Olympics. The International Olympic Committee is run on a day-to-day basis by Madame Monique Berlieu, its director, and her young international staff. In the winter of '79, uppermost in their minds were the 1,000,001 organizational details of the 1980 Winter Games in Lake Placid, which were to open in February.
We'll tell us each concerning the deadlines.
Let us review the situation for the departures for Lake Placid. Could you tell us who is leaving first?
The Summer Games in Moscow were still some time away. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, Muscovites toiled in temperatures of -9 to have the stadiums and Olympic venues ready for July 19th, 1980, without any union problems. The 20-year-old 103,000-seat Luzhniki Stadium, completely refurbished, lay waiting in the snow to greet athletes from upwards of 90 nations, or so it was thought. Architect Yevgeny Stamo said that he had aimed at modesty with comfort in the design of the Olympic Village, 20 minutes away by coach from the Luzhniki Stadium. The 18 apartment blocks were designed to accommodate over 10,000 athletes, but just how many would take up residence in those comfortable but modest rooms was to become the overriding issue of 1980. Across the world, legions of Olympic hopefuls began training to reach their peak and with luck realize their ambition of winning Olympic gold. Speculation was intense. Would America's discus thrower Al Orter be the first track and field athlete to win 5 Olympic golds? Would Finland's Lassi Viren carry off the incredible feat of winning the 5 and 10,000 meters in a third consecutive Olympics? Who would be the winner of the exciting duel in the middle distance races between Britain's two great runners, Sebastian Coe and Steve Ovett? Was America's Mike Tully invincible in the pole vault? Or would Abada and Vigneron of France prove too strong a challenge? Would China, newly admitted to the IOC, win their first gold with Zhengzhou? Or would the girls of Eastern Europe continue their domination of the sport? Girls like the great Nellie Kim, Maxi Ganauk of East Germany, Melita Rune of Romania, and Maria Filatova of the Soviet Union. In the men's events, would the USA's Kurt Thomas make #1 in spite of fierce competition from Russia's Didyatkin and Tkachev? Would Cynthia Woodhead prove herself to be the first woman swimmer to win 6 gold medals? Would the USA's great Ed Moses prove preeminent once more in the 400-meter hurdles? As 1980 began, the eyes of most athletes were firmly fixed on Moscow and their opportunity of winning in the Olympics. Meanwhile, the Russians sold the television rights for $87 million and worked to ensure that the coverage would reach an estimated audience of 2 billion viewers worldwide without a technical hitch. In London and 4 other cities across the world, a zippy fashion show revealed in the very best Western tradition just what the Russian Olympic staff would be wearing in the summer of 1980. Chic program sellers and sleek hostesses and guides, snappy official photographers, and the whizzy anti-doping control staff. The admin types in delightful summer shades of yellow and green. The maintenance staff had never looked better, but one couldn't help thinking there was something sinister about the senior management look. Finally, Mishka the bear was unveiled. The mascot they hoped would sell $1 million worth of merchandise. And then this happened. Russian tanks and troops crossed the border into neighboring Afghanistan on December 27, 1979. 3 weeks later, President Carter gave this ultimatum.
I've sent a message today to the United States Olympic Committee spelling out my own position that unless the Soviets withdraw their troops within a month from Afghanistan, that the Olympic Games be moved from Moscow to an alternate site or multiple sites, or postponed or canceled.
On January 22, 1980, at the International Olympic Committee's headquarters in Lausanne, the telexes never stopped chattering or the telephones ringing as the full implications of President Carter's ultimatum of the night before began to sink in.
NBC apparemment ne vient pas, ils ont envoyé un long telex.
According to IOC regulations, only a major breach of Olympic rules or a world war could stop the Moscow Games from proceeding as planned. As the world's press headlined the news, it was now up to the National Olympic Committee of each country to decide whether to send their athletes to Moscow or not. Meanwhile, on January 30th at ancient Olympia in Greece, the Olympic flame was lit for the Winter Games of Lake Placid. At Athens Airport, it was taken aboard Air Force One for the long flight to the United States. President Carter invited Muhammad Ali to go to Africa as his special envoy to persuade countries in Black Africa to back the U.S. boycott. Kenya, a notable Olympic nation for its long-distance runners, was one of the first to agree. In the British House of Commons, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher pledged the British government's support for the proposed U.S. boycott, and a few days later, Prime Minister Malcolm Fraser of Australia, on a flying visit to Britain, made his views on the situation plain.
In Soviet terms, the Olympic Games is a great political event, and after Afghanistan, any Olympic team that goes to the Soviet Union will, so far as the Soviet Union is concerned, be depicted as supporting Soviet foreign policy and hence that invasion of Afghanistan.
British marathon runner Bernie Ford, still in training, summed up the feelings of the majority of British athletes at this time.
Maybe morally we shouldn't go, but as an athlete I would very much like to go. Maybe I'm naive in thinking that politics shouldn't mix in sport, but I sincerely believe that.
On February 9th, Greece's premier, Konstantin Karamanlis, offered a site in Olympia as a permanent venue for the Summer Games as a way of releasing the Olympics once and for all from the sphere of international politics. On February 13th, the Lake Placid Games began, and the IOC's president, Lord Kalainen, made the IOC position clear.
All 73 members present at the 82nd session of the International Olympic Committee are unanimous that the Games must be held in Moscow as planned.
On February 21st, with the Russians still in Afghanistan, the U.S. boycott was put into operation. But it remained up to the Olympic committees of each individual country to make the final decision. The U.S. Olympic Committee here in Colorado Springs delayed their decision until April 12th. American gymnast Kurt Thomas had this to say.
I'm supporting boycott for the Olympic Games right now because I feel that it's in the best interest of the country. However, it is very disappointing for me because I've trained my whole life for this competition, and my only real chance to get a gold medal in the Olympics is to be able to compete. Now I'm not going to get the opportunity to compete.
Meanwhile, in London, the British Olympic Association was one of the first to decide, and they voted overwhelmingly to go to Moscow. Its chairman, Sir Dennis Follows, said afterwards,
"They feel strongly about sport as being a bridge, as it were, between nations. They don't like sport to be used as an instrument of foreign policy, though I don't think they'd mind very much if they were being used for positive reasons rather than negative ones. By positive, of course, I mean building bridges rather than busting dams, if I may use that phrase."
On April 12th, backing President Carter's boycott, the U.S. Olympic Committee voted not to go to Moscow. On May 14th, France defied President Giscard's advice and voted to go to Moscow. 2 days later, West Germany backed Chancellor Schmidt and voted not to go. Europe and the world were divided. Was this the beginning of the end for the modern Olympic Games? In Paris, at the Sorbonne University, where in 1894 in this amphitheater the founder of the modern games, Pierre de Coubertin, launched the modern Olympic movement, we spoke to one of de Coubertin's last surviving relatives, nephew Geoffrey de Novacel, who runs the Pierre de Coubertin Society. Did he think that Moscow 1980 could be the last Olympic Games?
So many times Pierre de Coubertin in the old time had such sort of problems, and that he said himself that each after Olympic Games were the last, people thought, and he said, well, they always exist and still exist, so we must be optimistic about this.
The idea of a permanent home close by the ancient site at Olympia was one solution to the present crisis that many favored. Would it really solve the problem? Or is deep-seated nationalism, coupled with rising costs, the real danger to the future of the Games? Olympic boycott made headlines around the world. In the small town of Olympia, Greece, a campaign had begun to return the Games to their original home.
The Olympic Games is born here from thousands and thousands of years ago. So now it is necessary, because of the political problems around the world, it's necessary to come back again and stop here in Olympia, not in any other place around the world or in Athens or in other places in Greece, only in Olympia, in the ancient Olympia.
It is in ancient Olympia that every